Is this,
That's our afternoon. This is the NED Little Rock. NED Little Rock, it's 59. I think those are all of our afternoon cases, that huge pile of 13. Don't make me start that one yet, Adam.
I meant to sign this at her desk and leave it with her. I walked off with it. Be right back. Everything on this one, Josh, Ashley.
yes.
Okay, has everybody already been introduced? Knows everyone?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Has everybody already introduced themselves?
I haven't introduced Bob Clay. He's our assessor's witness.
Morning. Okay. We'll start this hearing and begin it with witnesses. Mr. Ashley, do you have anyone who's going to testify for you?
Yes, Your Honor. We have Isaac Pfizer with Paradigm Tax Group, and he's called in by phone.
Great. Stand by, Mr. Pfizer. Madam, would you like to swear Bob and Mr. Pfizer in? I think they're the only two witnesses.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
I do.
Okay, Mr. Ashley, you can begin.
Yes, Your Honor. This is Josh Ashley, and with Jim Saxton, I'm here for Ned Little Rock LLC, the petitioner related to this property at issue. I'd like to begin by introducing Isaac Pfizer, who's going to be our testifying witness today. Mr. Pfizer is with Paradigm Tax Group. His group did a workup on the property to come to evaluation under the income approach and the sales approach. I'd like to begin by just having Mr. Pfizer describe the property briefly so that we all know what we're talking about in real world terms. Mr. Pfizer, can you briefly describe this property?
Yes, I can. Today we're going to be looking at the outlets at Little Rock. The address is 11201 Bass Pro Parkway. The subject was built in 2015 and has roughly 333,000 square feet of rental space. We took a look at this property in relation to as the property stood as of the lien date per Arkansas statute. So we took a look at the 2019 income and expense of which we forwarded to the county. We forwarded a rent roll as well as of the lien date of December 31st, 2019. As the property operated through 2019, it was operating as a stabilized asset, meaning the property was not going through stabilization. There wasn't any fluctuation of rents or vacancy or occupancy. The asset was stabilized and producing revenue based off of what was indicative of market. So our analysis, our income analysis is based off of the actual NOI, the net operating income that the property produced in 2019, and also the rents that are indicative on side of the rent roll, which we forwarded as well. Mr. Ashley, if you prefer, I can go ahead and break into the evidence of which we submitted to the courts.
Yes, that was going to be my next question. And just to kind of reset the stage, I think we're all on the same page, but the appraised value for this year is $61,050,000, and our petition seeks a reduction to $34,300,000. So, Mr. Pfizer, as we were saying, can you explain how you came to your valuation in this case?
Say your number again, Mr. Ashley. I thought you said 34.9 something.
It's 34.3, Your Honor.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Pfizer, can you explain how you came to your evaluation in this case, how you came to your number?
Absolutely. If the court has a copy of the evidence that we submitted,
I do.
if you can scroll down, I believe on the bottom right-hand side of the evidence that we submitted, you'll see a numbering as we've submitted quite a few pages. And if you go down to NED Little Rock, page 32, essentially what you'll see is a side-by-side apples-to-apples comparison as to what the county and the assessor did in comparison to what we would like to do with this asset, and how we believe that an income approach works into the numbers that are reflective of the fiscal year. So please let me know when you get there. And
I'm there.
okay. So if you'll see on the left column, you'll see that there's the assessor workup. Essentially, this is what was submitted to us by the county and how they derive the value of 61 million. Their income approach actually comes out to 63.8 million. They'll use a $20 per square foot in rents based off of 334,000 square feet. They'll take a 10% vacancy from that, which leaves their effective gross income somewhere close in the $6 million range. They'll then take an expense ratio of 15%. They won't apply a replacement reserve. So their NOI for the subject is $5.1 million. So essentially, based off of their income analysis, they're saying that this asset produced or is capable of producing $5.1 million in net operating income inside of the fiscal year. They'll take a cap rate of an 8%. And essentially, once you cap out that 5.1 million, it pushes out a value of 63.8 million. And the current assessment is at 61. At 61 million, that puts us roughly at $183,000 a square foot per the assessor analysis. Now, in regards to what Paradigm has done, we take a look directly at the operating income. So we forwarded a copy of the 2019 income expense and how the property performed inside the physical year. And we looked directly at the leases that were in place at the lien date as well. So we forwarded a copy of the rent roll as well for the assessor to review. The facts of the case here, I believe, are fairly straightforward. So as we dive into my analysis, we'll point out one thing inside of the assessor's analysis, kind of as an apples to apples comparable. The assessor is essentially saying that this property is capable of producing $5.1 million in net operating expense. If you scroll down to page 33, just the page right after it, this is a copy of the income and expense statement for the subject for 2019. It considers all 12 months in 2019, and this is the actual performance of the property inside of the physical year. It'll show minimum rents, overages rents. It'll show CAM reimbursements for things like real estate taxes, utilities, interest income, and miscellaneous. It will also show all of the operating expenses to include real estate, billable, non-billable, central utilities, marketing, and general administration. The big line item here is that you'll see right there at the bottom that this property was capable of producing income of $7.4 million. Their expenses were $4.3 million. Net operating income was $3.1 million. Can you see that, sir?
Yeah.
So essentially the crux of our arguments here is that there is a sizable discrepancy between NOI and what the assessor has done in comparison to how this property is actually performing inside of the physical year. Essentially a $2 million discrepancy in NOI. Now, if you go back to page 32, I'll briefly explain what Paradigm has done in comparison to our income analysis. We take our actual net leasable area of 333,920 square feet, which is essentially only 80 square feet off of what the assessor does. So no harm, no foul there. But what we do is we take into consideration the actual leases in place as of the lien date, which is reflected based off of our rent roll. So we come to a price per square foot of almost $17 a square foot, showing that the property is able to produce after a 10% vacancy, somewhere close to $5 million in rental revenue inside of the physical year. What we do in our analysis and the assessor and the county does not do is that we add back CAM reimbursements. So per the actuals that we showed below on page 33, the property produced somewhere close to $2.5 million in reimbursement. Reimbursement includes percentage rent for any clauses inside of the leases that aren't full market or triple net or percentage rent. So it's included inside of our CAM reimbursement. So what you'll see here is that underneath our effective gross income is that we really dove into the numbers here. Because our effective gross income, if you look at comparison to what the assessor has done, is actually higher than what the number that the assessor produces. They had an effective gross income of $6 million. We're coming to an effective gross income of 7.5 million. The largest discrepancy here inside of the income analysis, which really drives the differential in value from an NOI of 5.1 million down to 3.1 million is the expenses that are allocated here. Essentially, the assessor will speak on behalf of theirs workup, but when you're using a 15% expense ratio and you're not loading the cap rate, essentially what you're saying is that the property is triple net. And as you can see, they're true triple net, meaning that every tenant pays back a percentage of utilities, every tenant pays back a pro rata share of real estate taxes. True triple net means that the owner is not liable for these expenses whatsoever. So true triple net would mean that all real estate taxes are passed through the tenant. That burden and that encumbrance never touches the property owner because it is cammed back, and that liability, that expense is handled by the tenant. That's not the case in this property. In 2019, New England Development paid, if you go back down to page 33, and it'll show clear inside of the line item. New England Development paid a tax bill of $873,000. That's what the taxes were for this property inside of the physical year based off of the valuation of $61 million. Now, if you look under the operating income underneath the line item of real estate taxes, let me know if you're there on page 33.
Yeah.
You'll see that the real estate tax underneath operating income is $418,000. Essentially what that says is that they received cammed reimbursements on about half of what the tax bill was, meaning that New England Development was liable to pay half of the tax bill, of which they did, and that affects the NOI. So if we go back up to page 32, I apologize for going back and forth between the two, but I think this information is fairly important. If we were to take the discrepancy of that $400,000 between what this is just property tax alone, not to look at any other expenses to include utility, marketing, any of those pass-through maintenance. We take a look at what the assessor has done at $900,000. We take out the expense ratio or the expenses of $400,000. What the assessor is essentially saying inside of their analysis, if this is true triple net, that my client only paid $400,000 in expenses, not including real estate taxes for this property inside of the physical year. That puts us at an expense ratio of actually somewhere close to 7.5%. This property produced expenses at $3.4 million in 2019, as reflected inside of our income analysis on the right-hand side. So I think the biggest disparity or discrepancy here is that this property is being treated as true triple net, but as you can see based off of the actual income, that it isn't. And valuing this property as so has created a gap of $2 million in net operating income. We apply a 3% replacement reserve on our analysis as well on the right-hand side, getting our NOI down to $3.9 million. The reason why our NOI on our analysis is at $3.9 million is because I take out the real estate taxes so I can load the cap rate. It's our way of making sure that when we load the cap rate that we're able to incorporate that $400,000 in expense that my client was liable for. Now the reimbursement that my client received is included inside of that CAM reimbursement on the top. So it isn't double dipping because we never add the expense into the expense item, if that makes sense. take our cap, we load our cap rate of 10% based off of that NOI, and it pushes us down to a valuation of $34.2 million. And so that's where we stand and how we look at this property. We also look at our cap rate is not taken out of thin air as well. My client was considering putting this property to market prior to the lien date. So in December of 2019, my client went out and got a third-party review on what this property could potentially be marketed at as they were gearing up for a potential sale. And if you can scroll up to page 8, it shows a third-party review of this asset by JLL in December of 2019. This analysis was done in December of 2019, and JLL was approached by New England Development. So this is a report that we've had, that my client had prior to an appeal ever being filed for 2020. So this is a third-party opinion of value or opinion of market value that came out prior to us ever filing an appeal on this asset. And you'll see on page 8, the summary of value for this asset, if it were to go to market, is $15.8 million to $19 million. That cap rate ranges from 10 to 12%. Can you see that, Your Honor?
Yes.
And if you can go down to page 10, I'll explain why that number is so low for JLL.
Go ahead, Isaac.
Okay. JLL So JLL does essentially an income analysis here on page 10. They show the 334,000 square feet. They show a 10% market vacancy at the subject. They show the acreage, the year built, and they have an in-place NOI of 3.5 million. Right? The subject produced 3.1 million in 2019. But JLL's responsibility was not to look at a single year of performance, but to look at multiple years of performance as the property was in stabilization. So they looked at 2018 and 2017 income as well. And they're saying that their in-place NOI for the future could be somewhere around 3.5 million. The reason why their number is so low between the 15 million and the 19 million is because they put a sizable decrease or discount on buyer write-down. At the end of 2019, there were a sizable amount of tenants that were going to renew, that were up for renewal, and they did not send New England Development notice that they would actually renew their leases. So JLL took into account that these tenants may go vacant or delinquent sometime near in the future, and that they would have to market out new leases shortly after. So that's the reason for their $1.6 million write-down. But to say if we were to value this property strictly as of the lien date, and we were to use that 3.5 million NOI number divided by what we believe the cap rate should be at 10%, we're still coming to a valuation of 35 million. So nowhere does this suggest that this property is capable of producing $5.1 million in net operating income. And that's how we drive our values for the fiscal year and inside of this appeal. Mr. Ashley, if you wouldn't mind going into comparables, I think that should be it for the income analysis of it all.
Yes, and Your Honor, we'll cover the issue of comps when we get to the assessor's presentation. Isaac, I have one or two more questions for you. One is, when JLL was engaged, was this property, was it listed on the market for a particular asking price, or was it basically an invitation for offers?
It was an invitation for offers.
Okay. And did New England Development receive any offers?
Yes, in 2000 and at the beginning of 2020, they received a few offers on the subject.
Okay. Do you know the amounts of those offers?
There wasn't a single offer that they received that was north of the $15 million range.
Okay. The last thing, Isaac, is I noticed that there are a few differences in the way Paradigm addressed the valuation compared to the assessor's method on page 32. And I'm wondering what would happen if the categories were compared apples to apples a little more directly. Have you looked at that and what that would result in?
Yes, we have. So if you take a look, just so you can kind of see what would happen, this evidence wasn't submitted though prior to when it needed to be added to the docket. But if you go back down to page 32, if the judge has a pen and paper, I can really break it down for them so that they can see exactly what it would look like if we were to consider this apples to apples. So what it would look like essentially, what the assessor has done, their expense ratio, would have to be an assumption on my behalf because I'm not exactly sure how these numbers have come up, but this is how I believe it was done, is that their $20 per square foot is essentially either a triple net number or a full service number. At 10% vacancy, their expenses, obviously, their expense ratio, I'd assume, has to be a triple net number. So the CAM reimbursement, my assumption would be that they're essentially netted out inside of the assessor's workup. So if we were to consider apples to apples and I netted out my CAM reimbursement that you see, so my $2.5 million out of the expenses, essentially what it would look like is that I would still use my $16.87 and price per square foot in rent. So my potential gross would still be $5.6 million. I would still use a 10% vacancy. My CAM reimbursements would then be zero. So my effective gross income would be $5 million, roughly $5 million. What would change here is I would take my expense ratio, or my expenses of $3.4 million, and I would subtract the $2.5 million in CAM reimbursements to include real estate tax, but make sure that the $400,000 in real estate taxes is incorporated inside of expenses. When you do that, total expenses comes to $1.8 million. And those are all expenses in. And that ratio, that expense ratio, which I believe is extremely important, is 36%, not 15%. We then take a replacement reserve of 3%, and that puts me at an NOI of 3.1. That 3.1 number, I would then use my cap rate of 10%, and I would not load it with the tax rate because those expenses for real estate taxes are incorporated inside the analysis above. Doing that would produce still a value of $31 million.
Okay. Your Honor, I think that concludes the petitioner's presentation in terms of how it arrived at its value. With the caveat, well, Your Honor, as I said earlier, we're using the income approach, which yields the 34 number. We've said in our petition that if you did a sales approach, it would yield an even lower number. But since we're focusing on the 34, we won't go into the one comp property we found, which was an outlet mall somewhere else. But for purposes of the 34 million, that concludes our presentation of our evaluation.
Thank you, Mr. Ashley. And Ms. Davis, do you have some questions?
I don't. I think that our presentation is gonna go right back to it. So I think it'll be the best to just move forward.
Great. So let me say this to both attorneys. I really only planned for an hour for this, so we needed to be done 11 or not very long afterward. So if depending on the length of your presentation, you may want to keep in mind, you know, if we're going to have to break, where you want to break. You understand what I'm saying?
How long do you think yours will take, Bob?
10 minutes. You're in good graces so far.
And Your Honor, I'll have a few questions, I suspect, but I don't.
And I don't want to discourage either of you from making sure that you get everything you want to be heard. I just want to make sure that you're aware that, you know, of what the time is, so that if there's a better place, you know, for you to break, or for us to recess, you know, you have that insight. So let's proceed.
All right. Well, Bob, if you'll introduce yourself, tell us where you work and your qualifications, we'll let you get started.
Surely. My name is Bob Clay. I'm the commercial division manager for the Pulaski County Assessor's Office. I've been in the position since 2017. I've been with the Assessor's Office since 2000. Prior to that, I was a fee appraiser going back to 1986. I hold a certified general designation from the state of Arkansas, and also hold a designation from on ASA and IFA.
See, that was the 5 minutes of the 10 there. Frank, if you could share the screen of Bob's presentation, please. And I think everyone should have a copy of this, but just so it's up. And I'm just gonna, Bob, go ahead and get started for it.
Okay. You can just flip through the first several pages, pictures. Have a couple of sheets from CoStar just giving the particulars. Property record card. Several pages. Get to the 2017 reappraisal valuations. This is how we originally valued the property in 2017. This year, I believe the property went to the Board of Equalization 2018. And in that appeal, a value was agreed upon with the attorney from, I believe, Kutak Rock, that was representing the owners. So the value placed on the books was actually a Board of Equalization value set. It was an agreed value just 2 years ago between the assessor's office and the owner or owners. You can skip to the next page. It's just a copy of the mortgage. I believe this is a 2016 mortgage. That year may not be exactly correct. 2014, $68.8 million on the mortgage alone. The next page, I got several income and expense workups and rent rolls from Isaac. Originally, the rent roll that I received was from two was from February 2020. I did ask him for a rent roll that just spanned from January 1 to 12/31/2019. Not a whole lot of change there, but what I was confused about is the property includes 334,000 square feet of rentable area. I believe that's correct. Or am I still on the card? So yes, 334,000. And I was curious as to how Isaac came up with his rent rate of $16 and change when it was evident to me that there were several lines where there was no rent or CAM indicated. And you can see where I have the red marks where they have $12 under annual. Brooks Brothers, Cole Haan, H&M, and so on and so forth. Those lines were just blank. There was no rent indicated. So it became evident to me that what Isaac had done to come up with his price per square foot was to take the total square footage that was leased, including these spaces that don't include rent. Then he took the rent that is indicated and divided that out, which would indicate $16 and change. But if you actually look at the rent roll dated from 12/31/2019, they show a leased area of 222,472 square feet. That total rent's 4.8 million and change, which is an average rent of $22 a square foot. We were told originally the leasable square footage, I don't remember where this came from, but we were under the impression that the leasable was 391. That would show a PGI of like 8.6 million. But the total CAM shown was 1.9 million. And the square footage, I believe that's a typo. The square foot paying CAM is 192,000 square feet. The price per square foot of the CAM passed through was $10 per square foot. Okay, so they're showing total CAM of 1.9 million. And I believe they indicate their total expenses is 4.3 million, which was $13 a square foot. That's a pretty healthy expense amount on a property that's pulling in $22 a square foot rent, and they're passing through another $10 a square foot in CAM charges.
Bob, just to pause you for a second right there, and they spent a lot of time talking about CAM and true triple net and taxes passed through. Can you spend a little bit of time talking about how the assessor's office has figured that for this property?
Right. You know, the nomenclature kind of varies widely between appraisers and brokers, and what you call triple net is typically, again, it can vary widely, but it's basically you're passing through most of the expenses that the owner incurs, and those are the day-to-day operating expenses of the property that do not include debt service or depreciation of any sort. The lights, if you will, utilities, insurance, maintenance, that sort of thing. So if most of the expenses are passed through, we could have changed up our income approach and added the CAM that was passed through and then turned around and just took that money back out. But it was our opinion that the market amount, the amount that was passed through plus the $900,000 should probably be about market for what the expenses should be on the property. The rent roll that was included, they actually indicate or include a line for marketing. So they're including CAM, then they include a tax amount, then they include marketing, and then just other. So I'm hoping that kind of kind of spells out, kind of answers the question. In other words, on our income approach that I'll get to in a minute, we could have done the same thing they did, but it would have been a wash. You add the CAM, you take out the expenses, and what we're saying is, our opinion is the 900,000 should be the owner's expense amount that is due after they've received the CAM from the renters. Skip 2 pages to the one where I have the yellow area highlighted. So you can see the top area highlighted says outlets of Little Rock, the total square foot is 354,000 square feet. So I don't know if that's a leasable area, but I'm not sure exactly what that is. I'm assuming that's a leasable area, which is a little maybe 20,000 square feet than what we use. If you look down at the bottom, it says total vacant space, 37,000. Outlets of Little Rock total is 391,000. So that's where the 391,000 square feet from my other page came from. A lot of different square footages. To be perfectly honest, I couldn't figure out what the total NLA is, but from that sheet, it would look to me like the NLA is 391,473. If you go back up to the line just below the yellow line, it says occupied paying MR. That's 222,000 square feet. So there's a discrepancy. If you're saying that the total square footage is 334,000, they have a 10% vacancy rate. They're saying that they have 300,000 square feet that is leased. Occupied paying MR, 222,472. That matches the area that indicates they're paying $22 a square foot. So the total rent is $4,897,000. So where's the other 80,000 square feet of rent? Okay. The rent roll shows 222,000. The 4.8 million, Isaac's dividing the 330, however many square feet it is, to come up with his $16 a square foot. But their own rent roll indicates that 222,000 square feet is paying $22 a square foot. There's no rent indicated for the 80,000 square feet. I hate to speak for Isaac, but this is going from my recollection. I don't have any sort of record, but I asked Isaac at the end of the Board of Equalization hearing. So what you're trying to say is there's 80,000 square feet that's not paying rent, and his indication to me was yes. I also asked if they have written leases past January 1, and he said yes. I don't remember if I asked if they were at about the same price per square foot or not, but it's not like they don't have new tenants coming in subsequent to the lien date. So that is why I use $20 a square foot on my income approach. It's actually $2 a square foot less than their own rent roll indicates, that 222,000 square feet. I can't ignore that there's 80,000 square feet in the center that is leased, but we just don't know what rent is being paid. Okay. Skip to the next page. It's just a larger version of what we already looked at. Have some cap rate surveys, second half of 2019 from CBRE, retail neighborhood community centers. The subject property for Arkansas would probably be Class A, could possibly be Class B. They don't actually list lifestyle centers. They do list retail power centers. Class A, Class B, the cap rates, even in Memphis, range from 7 to a 9. From a 2017 reappraisal, Promenade, I believe Pleasant Valley, those centers, we used an 8 cap. Skip down to my income approach, it's in blue. One more, I believe. So again, I took the leasable area that they indicated, 334,000. I actually used $2 a square foot less than was indicated that the 222,000 square foot was being leased at. That's 10% VNC, 15% on expenses, which again would just be over and above what they've already passed through, and an 8 cap. Really, all I was trying to show here was here's the numbers that I'm taking, from the best I can from this income and expense. And just, I was trying to show the board that here's the value placed on the books. Looking at the rent roll that they've given us, the cap rates that are still in place as of the end of 2019. It appears to the assessor's office that $61,050,000 is still a market value, and we recommended a no change on the subject property. Last page, if you'll flip one more. These are really the only equity comps or the similar competing properties that compete with the subject for renters. Promenade and Pleasant Ridge. Promenade's on the books at 177 a foot. Pleasant Ridge is at 165. The subject falls in the range just above Pleasant Ridge at 167 a foot. The assessor's office recommendation again is no change.
We left 10 whole minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Does that complete your,
That is it. I think Josh will have a few questions, so I'll let him.
Mr. Ashley, you have questions?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few.
That's famous last words from attorney.
I know. Mr. Clay, we talked about true triple net and how that definition might vary among whoever's using the term. Do you treat this property as true triple net? And if so, what is the definition you're using when you say that?
Again, that's a nomenclature that you would almost have to define what true triple net means, because if a true triple net property means the owner incurs no expenses whatsoever. So under that definition, then no, we did not treat it as a true triple net property because we did include $900,000 worth of expenses.
Okay, and did you treat any of the taxes as being passed through?
I guess you could say that a portion of the taxes would be passed through.
Yes, but does your 900,000 number include any portion of the real estate taxes being passed through to tenants?
It is $900,000 of the OPEX. And so the real estate taxes are part of the operating expenses of the subject. So yes.
Okay. And how did you get the 900,000 number?
Again, I would have to go back and dive into exactly what was passed through. Looking at these expenses, the total expense amount is $433,000. It includes operating expenses that are not billable. They're small amounts, but there also includes marketing of $500,000. So marketing on a property like this doesn't really have anything to do with the day-to-day operating expenses of the subject. So if you remove the 493 from the 4.3, now you're down to about 3.8. And to be perfectly honest, I don't have in front of me exactly how I came up with that $900,000 figure, but that's the figure I used.
Okay. Is there any particular item of expense that you think is unreasonable?
$13 a square foot for a property like this is the healthiest expense amount that I've ever seen on a retail property.
Is there any particular item that you think is unreasonably driving that high number?
What is included in the general and administrative, 770,000, the operating expense, just the one line item. It's really tough for me to look at these one line items. I suppose we could go back through, we would have to go line by line in the income and expense amount, or income and expense report.
Okay,
I don't believe the marketing, that's one that just jumps out at me right away.
okay.
Because
How do you arrive at what you think marketing expenses should be for a property?
we don't include marketing expenses for a property. Doesn't have anything to do with the day-to-day operation of that property. Neither does any fee appraisal that I've ever seen across any sector.
Okay, so what are the things that you would include in operating, legitimately include in your opinion?
Real estate taxes, utilities, insurance, some administrative fees, management fees.
Okay. And just to be clear, we talked about a lot of different square footages, but the assessor is using 334,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't know if that's true and correct though.
And did you say that you assume that Promenade and Pleasant Ridge were under an 8% cap rate?
I really couldn't answer that question because I'm not sure which one of those two. Pleasant Ridge was valued by the Board of Equalization. I'm just going from memory from 3 years ago. They used an 8, possibly an 8.5 cap.
Okay. And you're just approximating the cap rate in this case from the CBRE data, correct? The data that's in the presentation we just saw.
Again, that was just to show that the cap rates used in 2017, the original cap rate used on the subject, I could go back and look, but I believe it was a 7 cap.
Okay.
That was the same cap rate, the 7 cap, and that was the same cap rate going from memory that was used in the original valuation on the two equity comparables.
Did you check to see whether there were any more recent mortgage filings than the one that's used in your presentation?
I had to have because I searched for NED. There may be more filings that I missed. I don't know if the mortgage has been modified to any degree or.
Okay. And I think my last main question is why I was surprised not to see Shackleford Crossing as a comp. Is there a particular reason why you chose Promenade and Pleasant Ridge instead of Shackleford Crossing, which is closer and generally more similar to this property?
It's not similar in the least. And the Shackleford Crossing was probably, depends on who you talk to. That property still has, I don't know if it has gravel floors in some of the bays, but some of the bays, from what I've been told, are still, I haven't physically inspected the Shackleford Crossing in a while, but I was told by, I believe David Elrod, that may be incorrect, but I believe David Elrod told me that it still was, a great portion was still unfinished. It never has been probably more than I would say 60% occupied in the I'm not sure exactly when it was built, but it's been a number of years. The two equity comps provided have similar occupancy rates. I know Promenade was at 79.1 right at the end of 2019. Pleasant Ridge, I'm not sure.
Okay, so did you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's got an occupancy rate similar to the subject, I would say.
Okay, so did you look at Shackleford as a comp and look at actual data for Shackleford, or did you just kind of rule it out early on based on the general thoughts you just told me about?
I ruled it out. I'm not going to use a property that I've been told has unfinished space versus property that is 90% occupied.
Okay. But you didn't confirm the empty space piece, correct?
Correct?
Okay. All right, Your Honor, if I might just check with Mr. Saxon for about 2 minutes, I think we're probably about done.
Okay.
Your Honor, we're back, and I just have one more question. Mr. Clay, this is, it's about page 32 on the petitioner's presentation.
Okay.
It's that side-by-side comparison that Mr. Pfizer presented. And the only thing I want to do, just to make sure I understand, is to have you explain which of those numbers on the assessor side are assumption numbers and which are based on actual subject property data information.
The $20 a square foot rent, again, is a conservative estimate using the square footage from the rent roll provided by the petitioner that indicates $22 a square foot on the 222,000 square feet of inline space. The 10%, obviously, that's what they have told us that the VNC is. I do have one quick question for, if it's okay, for Isaac. At one point in his presentation, he indicated that the 2019 expenses was $3.4 million, but I don't know if he meant that was the total expenses or a portion of the expenses.
Yeah, Isaac, you can answer that very briefly.
The $3.4 million number that we use in our analysis on the evidence submitted for page 32 is the actual expenses less real estate taxes. This allows us to take into consideration the $400,000 that was cammed back by the tenants underneath our CAM.
I understand, Isaac. That's fine. I appreciate it. The 900,000 would be the assessor's office opinion. The ACAP again goes to cap rates that going from memory that the BOE had used, and it's in the cap rate range indicated in the CBRE report from the end of 2019 year.
Okay, that's all of them except, and I apologize if I missed it. Did you give for the NOI, whether that was based on actuals or whether that had some assumptions built into it?
Well, the math is just the math.
Right, but I'm trying to figure out where the numbers came from that went into that end number.
Well, I could give you a better answer if I knew what the 80,000 square feet was leased.
Well, I'm just talking about the assumptions that went into the actual.
I'm assuming that 80,000 square feet is paying rent.
Okay. Your Honor, I think that's all the questions I have.
All right, Mr. Ashley.
I don't
David?
have redirect, so I'm done.
Okay, thank you all. what I'll invite you to do is send me a one-page, synopsis of your case with any other points you may want to make or anything you want to, highlight. Send that to me, not more than 2 weeks from today. And I'll give you all a ruling within 2 weeks from that date.
Understood, Your Honor.
That makes sense? Any questions?
None from the petitioner, Your Honor.
Okay, so I think I said it, but, and I'll ask you to keep that, document, should you choose to submit one, to one page.
Thank you, Your Honor. We will. And just to be clear, we're going to file that document with the county clerk's office, correct?
Yes. Yes. All right, that takes care of everything. Anybody got something I missed? Thank you, gentlemen, and everyone, have a good, safe weekend. And we'll hear from you within a couple of weeks. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Wait, my leg went to sleep.
Thanks, Bob. You're done.
Thank y'all.
But you're coming back with Jim.
I'll come back for moral support anyway.
Well, that one hopefully will be